Welcome to our channel, where incredible stories come to life. We're so glad you've joined us today. Before we dive into this special tale, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss out on tomorrow's exciting story. Trust us, you won't want to miss it. Let's get started and enjoy this unforgettable journey together. When the statue fights back, A. Wrestler versus the Royal Guard. Mike the Titan Brody was no stranger to the spotlight. A 32-year-old American pro wrestler known more for his antics online than his championships, Mike was constantly looking for the next big thing. His career, a mix of viral pranks, gym vlogs, and attention-grabbing stunts, kept him at the forefront of social media. But today, as he stood outside the White House, he had a plan, one that he thought would blow up his follower count and make him a legend. It was a bright afternoon in Washington, D.C., and the usual buzz of the city filled the air. Tourists took selfies, red buses hummed by, and street performers lured crowds with their music. Amidst the hustle, Mike stood out like a sore thumb. Wearing a tight tank top that showed off his muscular frame, he strutted down Pennsylvania Avenue, GoPro strapped to his chest and phone in hand, narrating to his live stream. "This right here, my friends," Mike said with a cocky grin, pointing to the figure standing motionless ahead, "is one of them Royal Guards, the guys who never blink. Just mannequins with rifles. Let's see if I can crack a smile out of this one." His followers went wild in the chat. Emojis flooded the screen and comments like "do it" and fire emojis lit up his feed. Mike was high on attention, feeding off the excitement as he approached the guard. He knew this was going to be gold, a moment of viral content that would surely get him the attention he craved. The Royal Guard, stationed near a palace gate, stood like a statue, dressed in the full ceremonial uniform, his rifle resting at his side. He was the embodiment of British composure. His eyes were forward, his posture rigid, unwavering. He was a figure of authority, but to Mike, he was just another object to be mocked. Mike circled the guard, keeping his phone trained on him. He threw out bad British accents, exaggerated salutes, and jokes about how stiff the guard was. Tourists around him started to notice. Phones came out and smiles turned to giggles. It was all fun and games, or so Mike thought. He leaned in closer, inching his face toward the guards. "You blinked yet, bro?" Mike laughed, clearly enjoying himself. "No, real serious guy, huh? Say something, man." Still, the guard didn't flinch. He stood motionless, as if he hadn't heard a word. Mike was having the time of his life, pushing his audience's buttons, completely unaware of the subtle shift in the crowd's mood. Some tourists lowered their phones, uncomfortable with the situation. A few even exchanged uneasy glances, but Mike didn't notice, or perhaps he didn't care. His performance was just getting started. With a smug smile on his face, Mike reached out, tapping the guard lightly on the shoulder. It was quick, almost playful, but it wasn't a joke anymore. Something in the air shifted. The crowd fell into an awkward silence. What was once a harmless prank had now crossed a line. But Mike was too caught up in his performance to realize it. He laughed to himself, still oblivious to the change in energy. The guard, however, didn't react. Not a twitch, not a flinch. Mike took it as a sign of weakness. "Okay, tough guy," he mocked. "You guys really trained to be statues, huh?" He flexed his bicep toward the guard's face, making a show of his muscles. "I bet you've never even seen the inside of a gym." Mike circled the guard again, this time stepping right into his personal space. He mimicked the guard's stiff posture, locking his arms at his sides, and began narrating in a mock-serious tone, like a nature documentary. "Here we see the wild British Guard in his natural habitat," Mike said. "Notice how he pretends not to feel emotions or protein deficiency." A few tourists laughed nervously, but there was no more genuine humor in the air. Some even started whispering. A woman near the front of the crowd muttered, "He's going too far." A child asked his mom, "Why is he being mean?" But Mike, high on the attention, didn't stop. He reached out again, brushing his hand across the guard's bare skin. Nice hat, bro. You borrow this from a marching band? The air felt thick now. The crowd's discomfort grew, but Mike wasn't paying attention. He bumped the guard's shoulder lightly, thinking it was all just a game. But this time, something changed. The guard remained perfectly still. Yet, in that stillness, a power simmered just beneath the surface. Mike's taunts had gone too far. The crowd, once laughing along, had started to feel uncomfortable, but Mike was too caught up in the moment to notice. He kept pushing, going for bigger reactions, desperate to create something viral. His followers were still spamming the chat with "do it" and fire emojis, egging him on, pushing him further into reckless territory. But for all his bluster, Mike was missing the subtle shift in the air, the way the atmosphere was changing from playful to something else entirely. The Royal Guard, still standing perfectly still, was no longer just a figure in a uniform. He was beginning to become something far more significant, something Mike didn't fully understand, and wouldn't until it was too late. Mike, feeling untouchable, circled the guard again, this time pushing the boundaries even further. He got even closer, standing directly in the guard's line of sight, his body towering over him. Mike was ready to make another joke, to land another jab, but he could sense the crowd's energy beginning to shift. The phones in the crowd stayed, trained on him, but they didn't laugh as loudly anymore. There were whispers now, hushed tones and awkward glances. For a brief moment, Mike paused. The silence that hung in the air was thicker than before, and even his own words seemed to have lost their edge. But the show must go on. Mike puffed out his chest again and pushed his luck even further. He reached up, tapping the guard lightly, on the shoulder like it was nothing. A quick poke, a playful nudge. The crowd went eerily silent. No more giggles, no more excitement. Just an uncomfortable stillness. Mike didn't pick up on it. His confidence surged, and he turned back to the camera, still wearing his trademark grin. "Still nothing," he said, taunting. "Man, you really do train to be statues, huh?" His voice was loud, but something in his chest tightened, a subtle feeling that he couldn't quite shake. He flexed his bicep toward the guard's face, smiling smugly. "I bet you've never seen the inside of a gym, huh?" The crowd's discomfort deepened, but Mike didn't stop. He wasn't backing down. This was what he did, what he was known for. He wasn't going to let some silent guard ruin his performance. He stepped closer, getting right next to the guard and mimicking his rigid posture. With arms locked at his sides, Mike started narrating in a mock-serious tone, like some ridiculous nature documentary. "Here we see the wild British Guard in his natural habitat," Mike said, exaggerating each word, dragging it out for maximum effect. Notice how he pretends not to feel emotions or, protein deficiency. A few in the crowd snickered uncomfortably, but the laughter didn't feel genuine. Some tourists shifted their feet, unsure of whether they should still be filming, while others lowered their phones altogether. Mike wasn't paying attention. He thought he was killing it. He pushed the boundaries again, this time reaching up and brushing his hand across the guard's bare skin, as if the guard was just another piece of clothing on display. "Nice hat, bro," Mike said, chuckling. "Did you borrow this from a marching band or something?" He laughed, still oblivious to the tension that had settled over the crowd. And then, Mike did the unthinkable. He bumped the guard's shoulder, just enough to get a reaction. It wasn't hard, just a playful nudge. But the moment his hand made contact, the atmosphere in the crowd changed completely. The silence grew heavier, as if time had slowed down. Phones rose higher. Some tourists whispered, others backed away, but no one moved. No one laughed. Mike's cocky grin faltered for the first time. The guard, still unflinching, shifted his weight, but it wasn't just a shift. It was subtle, deliberate. Mike didn't even notice it at first, but something inside him clicked. That wasn't just a move. It was a sign. The guard had noticed him, and Mike didn't realize it yet, but he had crossed a line. Mike took another step forward, and the guard didn't retreat. Instead, he moved, fluid, precise, almost invisible. In a blur, the guard's boot sliced through the air, passing Mike's block with military precision. "Whoa, whoa, easy there," Mike said, caught off guard. But it was too late. The guard's left arm came up, knocking Mike's hand aside. With the power of someone who had done this countless times, the crowd gasped. A sharp collective intake of breath. Mike stumbled backward, a little shaken, his cocky grin replaced with something far less confident. He wasn't in control anymore. The guard hadn't spoken, he hadn't shouted. He had simply acted. The crowd was silent, stunned by what had just happened. Mike, still reeling from the sudden turn of events, looked up at the guard, his earlier bravado completely gone. He'd underestimated him, and now he was learning that some things, like discipline and control, couldn't be mocked or shaken. And for the first time all day, Mike was speechless. Mike felt a flicker of doubt as he staggered back, but his ego refused to let him show it. The guard hadn't said a word. He hadn't even moved except for that fluid, perfect swipe of his arm. But the subtlety of the motion, the precision, the calm, the guard had made it clear. He wasn't here to play. Mike, however, wasn't ready to back down. His pride was still alive, buzzing with the need to be the center of attention. His live stream was still going, and thousands of eyes were watching. He couldn't let this moment slip away. Not like this. But the truth was, Mike was rattled. His heart was pounding. This wasn't a staged wrestling match, a setup for laughs. This was real. The crowd around him, which had once been cheering him on, was now eerily silent. Phones were raised, higher than ever before, capturing every second. The energy had shifted completely. It wasn't the fun, light-hearted vibe it had been at the start. Now there was tension, there was respect, and Mike had a feeling he wasn't in control anymore. He blinked, his mind scrambling to regain the upper hand. The live chat was flooded with reactions. "Bro, what just happened?" someone commented. "Did you get knocked out?" Another user posted, "Is this for real?" Mike's followers were no longer cheering him on. They were questioning him, and that made him even more determined to keep the act going. He wasn't going to let them see that the guard had gotten to him. Not yet. Not like this. He squared his shoulders and wiped the dirt off his elbow. "You got lucky," he muttered under his breath, trying to shrug it off as just a lucky move, a fluke. He looked up at the guard, who hadn't moved an inch, standing like a statue, his rifle still at his side, perfectly poised. His expression remained unreadable, his posture untouchable. Mike's muscles tensed. He could feel his pride fighting against the unease creeping into his chest. He wasn't the type of guy to back down, not in front of a crowd. This wasn't how he wanted the video to end. He wasn't going to leave here as the guy who got schooled by some silent soldier in a uniform. No. He was going to turn this around. He had to. So, he made his move. He clenched his fists, his knuckles cracking. As he cracked his neck from side to side, the crowd watched him in silence. Mike took a step forward, blocking the guard's path again. He was about to raise his fists in a mock fighting stance when he noticed something strange. A subtle shift in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. It was as if everyone, including the guard, was waiting for the next move. Mike, still trying to regain the crowd's favor, grinned. "What if I try something, huh? What are you going to do?" His voice was full of bravado, but the words felt hollow, even as they left his mouth. Deep down, Mike knew he wasn't in control anymore. He'd poked the wrong bear, and now he could feel the heat of that realization starting to burn in his chest. In the blink of an eye, the guard moved. It wasn't a rush, it wasn't a lunge. It was a single, precise step forward, the kind of motion that comes from years of discipline. Mike barely had time to react. The guard's boot swept past his block with military grace, knocking Mike's guard aside with the speed and efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Mike flinched, his stomach dropping. "Whoa, easy there," he shouted, but it was already too late. The guard didn't stop. His left arm shot up in one smooth motion, knocking Mike's raised hand aside with a force that sent Mike stumbling backward. The crowd gasped. Phones shook in the hands of tourists who'd been watching in disbelief. Mike's cocky grin faltered for the first time. This wasn't a game, This wasn't a performance. This was real. The guard, standing tall and unmoving, watched Mike with the calm demeanor of someone who had seen it all before. He didn't gloat. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, poised, ready for whatever came next. Mike, disoriented, blinked up at the man who had just wiped the floor with him. His chest heaved as he tried to steady himself. His ego, the very thing that had driven him to this moment, had taken a blow it couldn't recover from so easily. The crowd, once filled with amusement, was now silent, their eyes fixed on the guard. The tension was palpable. Some people looked on with awe, others in disbelief, but all of them shared one thing. They'd just witnessed a moment of raw power, discipline, and control. Something they would remember. Something they would never forget. Mike, still sitting on the ground, looked up at the royal guard, who hadn't moved. He'd expected a fight, a spectacle, but what he had gotten was a lesson, a humbling, undeniable lesson in respect. Mike finally understood that the royal guard wasn't just there for show. He wasn't just a statue. He was a soldier, and Mike had just crossed the wrong line. Mike was still on the ground, but his pride hadn't completely shattered. He groaned, pushing himself up slowly, his elbows shaking as he tried to steady himself. His head spun, his heart still racing from the adrenaline. The guard, unmoving, stood as though nothing had happened. His rifle at his side, his posture perfect, unshaken by the chaos that had just unfolded. The crowd around Mike stood frozen, not sure what to make of the situation. Some had backed off, others still recording, but the energy had changed. What had started as a light-hearted prank was now something else entirely. The tension in the air was thick, a mix of disbelief, awe, and a strange respect that had shifted the dynamic between Mike and the royal guard. Mike wiped the dust off his elbow and stood up fully, his chest heaving as he took a moment to regain his balance. His followers were still flooding the chat, but the comments had changed. No longer was he the brash, loud character they'd followed. Now he was the guy who got taken down in front of Buckingham Palace. "Bro, what just happened?" one follower typed. "Did he just drop you?" another commented. Mike's bravado was slipping, but he wasn't going to let anyone see that. Not yet. Not in front of an audience of thousands. Okay, he muttered, trying to laugh it off, but the sound came out strained. "You got me. I get it, you're tough." His voice wasn't as confident as it had been when he first started the whole thing. Mike's cocky grin faded into something more uncertain, but he still refused to acknowledge the full scope of his mistake. He wasn't about to admit that the royal guard had just destroyed his ego in front of everyone. No, he had to maintain his image. He had to show them that the same guy who got dropped could still be the guy who had control. He looked up at the guard, still standing tall, not a single sign of emotion crossing his face. The silence between them was deafening. Mike stood there, trying to gather his thoughts, wondering what he could do next. But no matter how hard he tried, the words wouldn't come. What could he say? He was supposed to be the one in control, but now, for the first time, he wasn't. Mike's followers kept commenting, more and more, of them flooding the chat with concerned emojis, disbelief and disbelief. "Bro, you got folded," one said. "Dude, you need to chill," said another. Mike stared at his phone, trying to compose himself, trying to find the words that would bring him back to the dominant position he had once held. But everything felt off now. His usual swagger, his confidence. None of it fit into this moment anymore. Looking up at the guard, Mike felt a pang of respect, a quiet, grudging acknowledgement. This wasn't the same guy he had mocked earlier. This wasn't some stiff, silent soldier. This was a trained professional who had just shown Mike what real discipline looked like. Mike knew he wasn't just standing in front of a statue. He was standing in front of a soldier who could drop him in an instant, and for the first time in his life, Mike wasn't sure he could handle that. The guard didn't speak. He didn't need to. His stance was still the same, unbothered, composed, the kind of unshakable stillness that only came from years of discipline. He was, without question, a force to be reckoned with, and Mike had learned the hard way. Slowly, Mike backed off, putting his hands in the air, showing he was done. All right, I'm done. Chill. Just a prank, man. He tried to play it off, but the words felt hollow. The crowd's energy had shifted again. This wasn't funny anymore. It was real, and they knew it. The Royal Guard hadn't even broken character. He hadn't reacted, hadn't let Mike's antics get under his skin. Mike turned, glancing at the camera still rolling. The chat filled with a mix of shocked comments and disbelief. The moment was already spreading across the internet, gaining traction at lightning speed. Respect, Mike muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else, finally realizing that the guard had done exactly what he was supposed to do. Mike had been taught a lesson, not in physical strength, but in control, something he had never truly understood until now. The guard didn't respond, didn't even look at Mike anymore. He simply returned to his original position, rifle at his side, posture as flawless as it had been when Mike first approached. Mike, still trying to salvage what little dignity he had left, turned away. But the crowd was no longer laughing. They had witnessed something far deeper than a viral prank. They had witnessed respect, they had witnessed discipline, and in the quiet aftermath, it was clear to everyone that Mike wasn't the same guy who had walked up to that guard a few minutes ago. He had been humbled, and for the first time, the Royal Guard wasn't just a soldier in a uniform. He had become a symbol of strength, of composure, and of a kind of silent power that spoke louder than words ever could. Mike's head was still spinning as he slowly walked away from the scene, trying to shake off the dizzying blow to his ego. His legs felt heavier than usual, and his chest was tight, the adrenaline still pulsing through him. As he moved through the crowd, he couldn't escape the growing realization that this wasn't just another viral stunt. It wasn't just about the number of views or the comments flooding his social media feed. No, something deeper had shifted in that moment. And Mike was left standing in the aftermath, struggling to understand the weight of what had just happened. His live stream was still rolling, and his followers continued to flood the chat with reactions. But these weren't the usual comments of admiration or excitement. No, these comments were full of surprise, disbelief, and even concern. "Bro, you just got dropped," one message read. "What was that?" another follower typed. Mike could feel the pressure building, the eyes of thousands of strangers watching him in real time, waiting for the next move. Mike's heart was still racing, but now it wasn't from the thrill of the prank. It was from the genuine sense of vulnerability he felt. The usual bravado, the cocky attitude that had carried him through his career, felt foreign now. His mind raced as he scrolled through the comments, seeing how his followers had turned on him. For the first time in a long while, Mike wasn't the one controlling the narrative. The Royal Guard had done that for him, but there was something else too, something that Mike hadn't expected. In the midst of all the chaos, in the midst of his pride taking a major hit, Mike had felt something he hadn't in years. Respect. A slow realization crept in, one that Mike wasn't fully prepared for. The guard had done exactly what he was trained to do. He hadn't shown any emotion. He hadn't risen to Mike's provocation. Instead, he had acted with military precision, with control. It was a kind of strength that Mike hadn't anticipated, and it hit him harder than any physical blow ever could. The guard's restraint, his unwavering stillness, had taught Mike something about discipline, something about how true strength wasn't about aggression or loudness. It was about control, about keeping your composure when everyone else would have crumbled. Mike had been foolish enough to test that strength, to push the guard beyond his limits. But in the end, it was the guard who had remained in control, who had executed his training with flawless precision, while Mike was left standing, humiliated and broken. Mike's fingers hovered over his phone screen as he considered the next move. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had to respond to his followers. He had to say something, anything, to regain some of the ground he had lost. But what could he say? How could he play this off, turn the situation round? He tapped out a quick message, his fingers trembling. All right, he typed, trying to keep his cool. "You guys saw that? Yeah, I got dropped. But that was some real discipline right there, respect to the Royal Guard. I underestimated him, and it won't happen again. Mike paused, rereading the message, trying to make sure it sounded authentic. For a second, he wondered if his followers would buy it. But the truth was, he wasn't just apologizing to them. He was apologizing to himself. For the first time in his career, Mike understood that there was a kind of power, a kind of silent authority that he had never truly grasped until now. It wasn't the kind of power he'd built in the ring or through his social media presence. No, this was something different. This was respect for the quiet, controlled strength that the Royal Guard embodied. Mike hit send and leaned back against a nearby wall, taking a deep breath. The comments on his live stream continued to flood in, but they were different. Now, some fans still supported him. Others were laughing at his expense, but there was a growing sense of admiration for what he had just experienced. Mike knew that in this moment, his followers weren't just seeing the prank they'd expected, they were witnessing something far deeper. In the coming hours, the video would go viral. Memes would circulate, commentary channels would analyze the fight, and Mike would be ridiculed by many. But in the midst of all that, there was something else, a new understanding of what it truly meant to be strong. And for Mike, that was the real takeaway from the day. As the video spread across the internet, more people began to comment on the Royal Guard. "Silent strength," one user wrote. "Discipline personified," said another. And Mike couldn't help but agree. The Guard hadn't just stood still all that time. He had become the embodiment of something much more powerful. And Mike? He had learned a lesson he would never forget. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's story. What did you think about Mike's experience with the Royal Guard? Do you believe he learned the right lesson? Or do you think he should have taken a different approach? It's fascinating to see how a moment of conflict can lead to growth, especially when someone's pride is put to the test. The Royal Guard demonstrated incredible discipline and restraint. But what about Mike? Can he bounce back from this and learn to respect that kind of quiet strength, or will his ego get in the way? Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from, what you thought of the Guard's response, or share any similar experiences where you've learned a hard lesson in humility. Whether you agree with Mike's journey or think he should have handled things differently, your perspective is what makes these discussions so valuable. If you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on our next exciting video. We've got more incredible stories coming your way, and we want you to be a part of the conversation. Your thoughts matter, so let's keep the discussion going.